I want to talk now about some other post-Freudian theorists, okay? Mainly we're going to talk about Karen Horney and Erik Erikson. Um, Karen Horney was also a close follower of Freud. In fact, she remained pretty loyal to Freud's ideas. In fact, she was the one who began the journal on Freudian psychoanalysis. But she also opposed some of his ideas and so made some revisions, some modifications. So this isn't like Adler and Jung, okay, who split away and then created their own separate theories from scratch, essentially. Okay, this is someone who's remaining pretty loyal to Freud's ideas, but making some amendments. Particularly, she opposed to Freud's idea of penis envy, okay? For her, if it was the case that women felt inferior to men, it was because of environmental and cultural reasons, okay? It was because they were acknowledging the fact that men were being granted privileges from an early age that women were not, and that they were maybe longing for these privileges, okay? But there wasn't some biological innate reason for it, okay, in the way that Freud laid out. Her argument is quite similar to a concept Adler had called masculine protest. And she also countered this by coming up with an envy of her own, which was womb envy. The idea here was that women, because they're the carriers of life, the ones who bring life into the world, men are subconsciously jealous of this. And so the way that they compensate for this is by trying to control women as much as they possibly can. And this was a big part of her idea on feminist or feminine psychology, that this womb envy was kind of at the core of what was creating the patriarchy. And she was really the one responsible for starting this subfield of feminine psychology, which is still a sub-discipline within psychology today. Interestingly, she wrote quite a well-regarded book on the topic, really beginning the subject. And then she didn't write any more on the subject. It's not entirely clear why, but maybe because it was something that was getting a lot of attention and she was quite a shy, introverted person. And so maybe she didn't really like that attention, or maybe she felt as though she had said what she wanted to say on it. But most of her work otherwise focused on understanding neuroses, okay, which is really what we're going to focus on. Psychoanalytic social theory. Okay, so remember, for Freud, neuroses is chronic mental distress, right? And so I'm going to go further into how she is conceptualizing this, okay? But her theory is mainly addressing what causes neuroses and its manifestations. As usual, I'll tell you a little bit about the theorist because, her early life has some impact on the theory she created. So she was born in 86 in a village near Hamburg. She was the second born, and she was very envious of her older brother. Her older brother was very popular. She says he was, very attractive and so very popular, easily making friends at school and so on. She believed he was the favorite of her parents. He was very athletic and so on. In comparison to Horney, who always felt very insecure about her looks, okay, not helped by the fact that her father used to humiliate her for her looks, called her ugly. And she also found it difficult to make friends and didn't really feel as though she was ever very popular. One thing illustrating this is when she was 16, she wrote in her diary, "Why is everything beautiful on earth given to me, but not only the highest thing, not love? I have a heart so needing love." And then in 1906, she studied medicine, did very well, excelled. And during this time, yes, met the man who would become her husband, but she says they never fell in love with one another. It would be an unsuccessful marriage and one that had affairs on both ends. In 1910, she started to attend psychoanalysis sessions for her depression, but she found it was only of minimal help, okay? So instead, she turned to self-analysis, and what she found very helpful was this work by Alfred Adler. she felt as though his theory really made a lot of sense and really helped her explain a lot of her own distress. She realized that she had felt inferior because of her comparison to her older brother, because of her neglect early in life from her parents, and that this inferiority had been a chronic part of her since, and that she had been compensating for it in various ways, especially in academia. One thing she had always took pride in was that she was more academically inclined than her older brother. So that was her way of compensating, that she was, better, at least in this field. And then in 1932, she and her daughters moved to the US. She began a relationship with Erich Fromm, who went on for 20 years. Erich Fromm was also a psychoanalyst, remained pretty loyal to Freud's ideas, probably best known for coming up with the authoritarian personality, which is something we'll talk about later in the course when we talk about personality and politics. And then she remains a popular lecturer, writer, and therapist until her death. So at the core of Horney's theory is this idea of safety needs, okay? That people, infants, come into the world needing a sense of security, okay? They need to feel secure within their environments. There needs to be dependability, okay? They need to have a caregiver who is responsible, responsive, consistent, dependable. And so this safety need is really going to be determined by how they're treated by the parents. Is the parent warm and consistent or non-dependable? So if the parent isn't dependable, then these safety needs can be undermined, right? And it can be caused by a number of factors, humiliating the child, for example, as Horney felt as though she had been humiliated by her father. Parents not keeping promises, therefore the child learns that they can't trust the parent isn't dependable. If there's an obvious favoritism for another sibling, and if the behaviors by the parent are regarded by the child as being unfair or not being predictable, being erratic, okay, any of these factors can make the child feel as though they're not really having their safety needs met, okay, within their upbringing. If the safety needs are undermined, then the child begins to generate basic hostility, okay, according to Horney. So this is a bit of a resentment, hostility, because safety needs are not being met by the parent, okay, who's meant to be there to make the child feel secure, okay? Now, basic hostility could be dealt with if the child is maybe more on the resilient side of things, if they have good coping mechanisms, if they have other positive sources in their environment, okay? But otherwise, it might be repressed, okay? And if it is repressed, which is often the case, because, if you're being raised in the sort of environment where the safety needs are not being met, it's unlikely you'll have the environment, okay, that's going to be able to help you deal healthfully with this basic hostility. And also, since it's the parents who are often causing the distress, it's going to be repressed also because the child won't really have the confidence to confront the one who's causing the hostility. So if the basic hostility is repressed, it then turns into basic anxiety, okay, which is pervasive feelings, okay, that last into adulthood of helplessness, loneliness, insecurity, okay. It can manifest in several ways, which I'll illustrate. But it's this basic anxiety that's the foundation of neuroses, okay, according to Horney. So we will all feel basic anxiety at some points, okay? The way that we can deal with these are called stealth mechanisms, somewhat similar to Freud's defense mechanisms, though these operate consciously. And they quite clearly overlap with Adler's lifestyles. But that shouldn't be surprising because Horney was very much influenced by Adler's ideas, okay? So it's not too surprising that we see a lot of inspiration from Adler in her theory. So the first self-protective mechanism I'll mention is attaining power, okay, which is similar to the dominant lifestyle in Adler's theory, okay? It's dealing with your basic anxiety by feeling superior to others, okay? By tearing down others in order to prove that you're better than them, okay? In order to prove your dominance. So again, it's this, this preoccupation with dominance and status and power, okay? And remember, in Adler's theory, the dominant lifestyle is more likely to be on the superiority complex side of things, right? So that's the first one, the attaining power self-mechanism. The other one I'll mention is withdrawing second, which is more similar to the chronic inferiority that Adler outlined, okay? So in this case, one, because of their insecurity, because of their basic anxiety, they withdraw from social situations, they withdraw from relationships, okay? Because that way they won't get hurt, okay? They're more self-reliant, more independent, okay? They're more focused on their own personal goals and so on, rather than trying to make connections with others, okay? Because that way they won't be disappointed, they won't be upset. Being submissive, which is about really feeling as though if you bend to the will of others, if you try to people please as much as possible, then you'll be liked, okay? That's the way then of dealing with your basic anxiety, okay? In this case, when one's in a relationship, they'll always take the blame. They'll never want to risk offending someone else, okay? Because of their insecurity, okay? They're always going to be compliant. They're always going to be submissive, okay? Always wanting to try and please the other person and, grovel and beg for some source of attention. And then lastly, securing affection, okay? Which for Horney is the healthy way of dealing with basic anxiety, right? Dealing with anxiety and making yourself feel belonged, okay, through healthy relationships, okay, through mutual love, okay, through loving someone, feeling loved, being able to trust someone, being open with someone, being able to depend upon someone, having a healthy relationship and forming good connections with people. This is the way of healthfully dealing with anxiety, securing affection. Okay, is there any questions so far? These make sense? Okay. Now, if one has one of these unhealthy safe mechanisms, then according to Horney, they have neurotic needs, okay? Neurotic needs which very much influence their life in a very unhealthy way, okay? The first two are to do with the being submissive, okay? So a neurotic need for affection, approval from others, a neurotic need to have a powerful, dominant partner, okay, who can tell you what to do. The next five are neurotic needs to do with attaining power, if one has this self-protective mechanism. So a neurotic need for power, a need to exploit others, for prestige and social recognition, for personal admiration, and for ambition and personal achievements, okay? So all of these neurotic needs, again, to do with power, dominance, status, right? And then the final three are to do with the withdrawing unhealthy type, right? So restricting one's life to narrow boundaries, okay? Sticking to what they know that they're good at, to what they're familiar with, so that they never have to risk being judged or being disappointed with themselves. A neurotic need for self-sufficiency and independence, because you've withdrawn from others, because you can't depend upon others. And a neurotic need for perfection. What I mean here by perfection is technical perfection, okay? So being absolutely perfect at what it is that you do, okay? Whatever it is that you're putting your attention into. Now, these neurotic needs were developed by Horney early in her theory, but she later recognized that there was a lot of overlap. And so she came up with the neurotic trends, believing that that was a better way of illustrating what she was talking about. The neurotic needs clearly correspond to these neurotic trends, okay? So that they're making up certain needs. So the first two needs make up the trend of moving toward people, okay? And if you have this neurotic trend, then Horney would call you the compliant personality, okay? The compliant personality type, moving toward others, begging for approval and affection, okay, needing a partner to dominate you and to tell you what to do. The next five make up moving against people, which is the aggressive personality, okay? So remember, needing to be better than others in order to deal with your insecurity, okay? Tearing down others, make yourself feel better, be superior. And then the final three is withdrawing. It's moving away from people, which she calls the detached, withdrawing personality, okay? So let me just sum up what I've said so far, okay? This is just a sum. So if one feels somewhat rejected or neglected or humiliated, or as though their safety needs are not being met, they'll begin to harbor basic hostility. If this is repressed, okay, then feelings of helplessness and loneliness begin to emotionally cripple the person, which is basic anxiety, a feeling of insecurity, which is the foundation of neuroses. And so if one is neurotic, if they do have neurotic tendencies because of this basic anxiety, then there's three main ways of dealing with it, right? Moving toward people, the compliant personality, moving against people, the aggressive personality, or moving away from people, the detached, withdrawing personality, okay? And so that's the three types of neurotics in Horney's theory. Makes sense so far? Is there any questions? Okay. So to tie in with this, another big part of Horney's theory is this idea that people have a self-image, okay? They have a self-representation in their mind of who they are, okay? If one has an accurate self-conceptualization, then they are on the way to self-realization, okay? Which is fulfilling your potential, okay? So if you know who you are, what your strengths are, what your limitations are, what you're good at, what you're liking to do, what you're prone to do, and so on, then it's more likely that you'll progress, okay, towards self-realization, maximizing your potential, getting what you want out of life, and living a healthy life. This idea of self-realization is somewhat similar to some of the humanistic theories, like that by Carl Rogers, but they seem to have got there independently. But I should say that Horney didn't really write very much on what self-realization actually looks like, okay, in terms of operationalizing or defining it. So it's a little bit vague, but I guess the reason for that is because it will be unique from person to person. You know, what it is to reach your own potential, okay, will, you know, be unique to you. But this will be what is likely to occur if you have this healthy self-image that's truly reflective of your own strengths and limitations and who you are, that isn't crippled by insecurity, right? But neurotics, on the other hand, they don't have a healthy self-conceptualization, okay? They don't have an accurate self-image. Instead, they flip, okay, between a despised self and an ideal self, okay? That's the two images of their self that they have in their minds. So the ideal self is who they feel they should be, who they want to be, okay? Because of their insecurities, that's what they're always telling themselves that they need to be. But no one's perfect, of course, right? So people are always going to fall short at some points. But the neurotic despises themselves when they don't reach their ideal self, okay? When they don't measure up. And so they may have times in which they're identifying with their ideal self. It's probably a bit of denial, but they feel as though they are living up to this ideal image that they have. And then there's other times when they despise themselves for not living up to that ideal, okay? And so that's what they're doing, flipping between this despised and ideal self. So to sum up, you know, the healthy person has a real self-concept reflective of who they are on the process to self-realization. The neurotic switching between a despised and ideal self, okay? It's a mental state, right? Now, exactly what that ideal self looks like will depend upon which neurotic type one is, okay? But it's ruled by the tyranny of the shoulds, meaning that the neurotic always thinks they should be this, okay? So the compliant personality feels that they should be self-sacrificing. They should always be cooperative. They should always be compliant. They should always be putting others first, okay? They should always be putting their needs second, okay? They feel as though this is the image they always have to be living up to, okay? The aggressive personality, they feel as though they should always be the winner. They always should be the dominant one, the powerful one. You know, if you're not the dominant one, then you could be victimized. So you have to make sure that you're not the victim. That's what they are concerned with, right? And that's what they're always trying to live up to. And then the detached, withdrawing personality feels as though they should be self-reliant, independent, not relying upon others, and they should be perfect at what they've chosen to do, okay, with their energy, their time. Again, just to amplify, this is a technical perfection, okay? It's not a moral, it has no relation to feelings of morality, okay? It's more the compliant personality types who feels as though they should always be good and saintly, okay? The detached withdrawing type is aiming for more technical perfection in what it is that they're doing. I'm telling you that because you have a quiz this week and words matter, okay? So I'm giving you a bit of a hint, okay? Okay, so that's really the outline of Horney's theory. You know, it's not a comprehensive theory in the way that Jung's and Adler's and Freud's were, okay? But it's dealing with a niche. It's dealing with one particular issue, right? It's dealing with neuroses rather than trying to be more encompassing and trying to explain all human behavior in the way that Freud's and Jung's were, for example. She also has some ideas for psychotherapy, though she largely used Freud's ideas. So she was, you know, a big proponent of free association. You know, again, a way of tapping into the unconscious, right? When the client just says what's on their mind. She was also a big proponent of dream analysis. She largely followed Freud's instructions for dream analysis. The only real distinction is that, you know, Freud would interpret even a single dream. Horney didn't believe in interpreting a client's dream until there had been a series of dreams or she had got to know the person. She wouldn't interpret a dream on the first session. And then there are some scales designed to measure these neurotic trends, okay, that she outlined. And they do actually overlap with disorders in the DSM. You know, those in the aggressive neurotic trend type are more likely to be high in antisocial personality disorder, for example. Those with the withdrawing detached neurotic trend, more likely to have an avoidant personality type in the DSM. So, you know, it does seem to be tapping into something that's real in the sense of maladaptive thinking styles and other, you know, maladaptive patterns of behavior and so on. They're also being picked up by the DSM and other, you know, measurements of mental disorders. So, you know, a big part of Horney's psychotherapy might be, you know, challenging one in terms of, you know, why do you have this ideal self and despise self? You know, if you're not always the best, if you're not always the winner, what do you think is actually going to happen? You know, do you really think it's the case that everyone's always judging you? Do you really think it's always the case that people aren't going to like you if you're not always on top? You know, maybe some, you know, early attempts at CBT, if you like, you know, challenging cognitive distortions. That might be part of the Horney psychotherapy. Okay, so, you know, I think what I've told you here is pretty simple, easy to understand, probably the easiest to grasp out of the theories that we've covered. You know, it's a less sexist theory than Freud. It has had an impact on the development of humanistic theories. It's pretty comprehensive in terms of understanding the development of neuroses. Probably no other theorist has given so much attention to this single issue, okay, of neurotic behavior. And she's had a big impact on therapy and self-analysis as well, actually. She wrote some self-help books, probably one of the first to do, at least one of the first psychologists to do so. And like Adler, was a believer that people could help themselves, maybe not for major disorders, but, for minor stresses in their life or making slight changes in their life, that people could, get insights themselves from learning about psychology and help themselves in some ways. But the theory is quite general, quite descriptive in some ways. Again, it's had very little research testing it, again, because not all of these ideas lend themselves easily to scientific testing. It's not very comprehensive, but again, it's not really intended to be. It's not really focusing on normal development. There's no real acknowledgement of biological forces, natural predispositions. And you could argue maybe it's an incomplete theory because, for example, she doesn't really illustrate what self-realization actually looks like. So your key outcomes to review. But before we finish up, what I'd like you to do is, if you look on Canvas, you'll see that there is an inventory for measuring neurotic trends.